Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Bill Beardsley.
How about those roots of creation? We need to find those roots. And how about Bernie Sanders? Are you feeling the fire? I've been involved in national political campaigns since I was a youth and before I could even vote. I've always supported those of a progressive persuasion. I've always supported those who appear to have a significant level of integrity with consistent moral, ethical backbone. I've been more disappointed than not in the results of that support. One could conclude, on the face of it, that there's little chance of progressive politics ever winning the day on the national level. It seems few have understood the necessity of grassroots politics and support. That is, until Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders gripped my imagination long before he ran for president the first time. Being neighbors, Bernie has visited Keene often over the years. Bernie has been a voice, a presence, and active support for the kind of values and politics that fire my passion and commitments. His understanding of the vital link of local, national, progressive politics keeps him connected, on his toes, and responsive to the electorate. I have seldom been as excited about a presidential candidate as I was and am. Not me, us. Not me, us. That's Bernie's refrain. He knows he cannot do this alone. Bernie knows he cannot be beholden to corporations as people in their economic stranglehold over our government. Bernie knows that it's possible to remedy some of the most pressing issues of our time, such as education, healthcare, poverty, racism, sexism, environmental degradation, labor, and wages. Bernie knows a perpetual war-based economy and war-making hurt us rather than help us. Bernie knows with you and me, he can and will win. Dr. Cornel West remarked, Bernie is the real thing. Bernie has been the thermostat. He has shaped the climate of opinion. Too many of them are thermometers. They reflect the climate of opinion. I would much rather have a thermostat as a president than a thermometer. Please join me in supporting and working for the next President of the United States, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Please welcome Megan Harris.
It's so good to see so many of you here today. My name is Megan Harris, and I grew up in southern Vermont. I know my story isn't unique. As a single mother of three, my mom often struggled to piecemeal a budget making hard decisions between healthcare and heat. We never knew hunger, but we did know the furrow in her brow when we required sneakers a month or two earlier than the budget allowed. Kids sometimes grow faster than budgets. When my father returned from Vietnam, he was diagnosed with PTSD and diabetes from exposure to Agent Orange. At 33, he was told after a double and a triple bypass that his best bet would be to find a quiet place to die. When he finally did pass 22 years later, it was not just because of the diagnosis he had received from doctors, but the prognosis of a failing system that neglected one of its own proud warriors. My life has been punctuated with reminders of my father's struggles, which have only brought to light for me the reality of a system that is willing to pay for war, but refuses to see its own citizens as worthy of the resources their own tax dollars pay for. From healthcare to veterans to the daily struggle of single mothers to the debt I've been able to saddle myself with in my own quest for upward mobility, Americans deserve a country where children are not the victims of their families' legacies, where parents aren't fearful of the future, and where veterans don't die from their wounds of war at the age of 55. I believe this future is possible, and I believe that when we come together to elect leaders that have our interests at heart and the proven record to show that, there is no task too big to undertake, and there is no future too bright to imagine. Thank you.
Please welcome Tris Patron.
Hey everybody, I hope y'all are just as excited to be here as I am today, as, a Bernie Sanders comment. So, as you all know, we have a critical election that could potentially take us out of this very rogue time in U.S. politics. And also, a lot of you may be wondering, who is this kid on stage and why is he talking today? So my name is Tris Patron, short for Tristram. Yeah, we'll take questions later. I'm currently a senior here at Keene State College, and I'm from Concord, New Hampshire. In my time here, I've been very active in the college and the community. I've run cross-country and track for the college, and on a more relevant note, this past midterm election, I worked to get Keene the highest percentage of youth voter turnout across the state and break that record. Yeah. But it's no secret that my classmates and I will graduate with some of the highest student debt in the country. And it's no secret that if I choose to stay in New Hampshire after I graduate, I will also find it very difficult to establish a life here, as we also have the lowest minimum wage in the country here at $7.25 an hour, and a very high cost of living due to our high property taxes. And as a whole, these issues will cripple my entire generation as we transition into adulthood, and that's very terrifying. But there's other issues, and issues outlined in Bernie's campaign, that affect more people than just young people like myself. And for that reason, I've decided I want to take my time up here to share a very personal story about myself with all of you. So, I grew up in a very unique environment. My parents were divorced at age 2 and had a very unique divorce decree to where we were kind of split up 50-50 custody. I'd spend 1 week with my mom, 1 week with my dad, half and half. But what was very unique about that was when we lived with my dad and stepmom versus my dad and I lived in different households. We lived in very different socioeconomic paths. But, it wasn't until around 2009 that I suddenly started to see things that changed outside of just those, very different economic backgrounds. So, In 2009, when I was 12 years old, my mom got into a car crash and by her doctors was directed to use painkillers to help. But unfortunately, living in poverty, she did not have the access to health care. She requested the help she needed, and she got painkillers out of pocket. As most of you know, in like the late 90s and up to the mid-2000s, there was a major overprescription of painkillers. And while she did pay out of pocket for this, it eventually did kind of break our very fragile budget. So suddenly when things started to change, she had to seek new ways to deal with her pain. That unfortunately led to a very, very dangerous heroin addiction that was by her and my stepfather that we grew up with. And yeah, in like a few months span, I could see just the mother I'd grown up with change drastically. Sudden changes in her behavior or actions, like she was irrational, disorientation, these cycles of like hyper alertness followed by suddenly nodding off and like a droopy appearance. But you know, she, like many others, had found heroin as a cheaper alternative to feed her addiction. And like she only kept this secret for a while because she avoided treatment due to like the bad stigma around addicts. And again, she didn't qualify for Medicaid, so she couldn't even seek treatment to getting methadone. And since I've talked to her about this, she's described that to me as pretty much like a legalized version of the drug that really doesn't help you. But you know, the drugs did change who they are and subsequently led my sister and I to have to grow up very quick. And you know, I didn't understand these issues at that age and like how that played out into like who she was and like where my life was going. But due to those circumstances, I had to live with my father full time. And you know, for a while, I resented her wholeheartedly for that. And I regret that a lot. But as I've gotten older and I've gained an education and have been working around these issues, you know, as well as like student debt, climate, and voting rights, which are very important, I began to shift that frustration, not only her, but to like our state and our country and how they were dealing with it. Because it wasn't really as bad that she was like a heroin addict. It's about how like long, unrecognized, and how untreated it went to where it literally drove us to a point that broke up like my family and will forever like hold these scars inside of me that I will never be able to get rid of due to what I saw. And as I grew older, in seeing that it wasn't her fault and talking to her, I realized that like, yeah, it was 100% like the state's fault. And I know this because she was able to maintain a full-time job, her and my stepfather, this whole time. Nobody reached out to them for treatment when they could visibly see her struggling, even though she couldn't afford the health care that so many of us have like a privilege to have. And you know what? You know what's the scariest part about this? A lot of us think that those addicts just kind of live under the ground. She worked for the state of New Hampshire. She was a state employee for 11 years in the Health and Human Services Department. This issue was right in front of the state of New Hampshire, and they still could not act on it. They could not act on it knowing she had a family at home. She had children that were going through this. Family could not address it until me and my sister's childhood had to be drastically altered for our own safety, destroying our relationship with our mother simply because she couldn't afford the painkillers, simply because she couldn't like afford Medicaid to help her through treatment, and that's wrong. And I find that I'm fortunate, as in that I had a place to go. I could stay with my father and go on to college and hopefully have a good life after this with all the student debt I'm going to have next year. But that still doesn't take away the issue. There's hundreds, there's thousands, there's millions of other children just like me who grew up in that same circumstances, who didn't have that privilege because they don't have health care. That's why we need a candidate who will support universal health care and treat all of our people accordingly. And we know that these issues are, it's not like one and done, And so there are a lot of other issues, and we are actively working on other issues as far as climate, education, and voting rights. So, please, please vote, and keep in mind the debt that my generation is going to take on, the circumstances of the climate crisis that my generation will have to take on, and the inaccessibility to vote that students right here in New Hampshire will not be able to do. So please, please sign on to the Green New Deal. Please sign on to free college for all and voting rights for all of those in our New Hampshire. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jillian Mitchell Love.
First, let's hear it for Bernie. When I was asked if I would be interested in speaking at this event in support of Bernie Sanders, I was hesitant. I strongly believe in Bernie, but I didn't know if I believed in myself. My life currently feels like a mess, and the political climate of today feels even worse. I do not go a single day without fearing for my future or the future of humankind. I, however, am not alone in this. People all over the U.S. are living in constant stress, fear, and anxiety. Every day, people worry about their ability to afford the basic necessities such as food, medication, or shelter. Others worry about their physical safety or mental well-being. No matter your specific concerns, it is evident that our current system is failing us. As a person of color who grew up in New England, I've often felt like I was an othered demographic. My identity as a transnational adoptee meant that some people would never see me as an American. In recent years, I have experienced an increase of racial slurs, hate speech, and was even assaulted by a Customs, Border, and Protection officer this past summer. The incident occurred because I dared to question CBP officers who I feared were racially targeting people of mainly Latino descent as they attempted to board a plane to South America, the same plane I was on to visit my biological family for the third time since my adoption. As a result, I was threatened, intimidated, and physically harmed by an officer who proclaimed that he could do whatever he wanted to me. When I returned to the U.S., I was terrified of being further mistreated, since despite the fact that my rights had been violated, the officer who assaulted me would not be held accountable. This was infuriating, but not shocking, as people of color in the U.S. are routinely being abused or, worse yet, killed. The harassment and hatred of people who belong to marginalized identities are fueled by the false negative stereotypes perpetuated through our media and by political leaders as well. While we have now seen more politicians speak out against such acts, one has been doing so long before this administration. Bernie Sanders has been taking a stand against injustice and bigotry for the majority of his lifetime, and he continues to do so today. He has publicly denounced the actions of racist individuals, politicians, and policies. And what is even more impressive than his political record is that he does all of this because he genuinely cares about the well-being of people like you and me. Whether the issues that impact your life are rooted in racism, sexism, or classism, Bernie Sanders stands against them all. This is why I believe in him so deeply. As many people tell me that my dream of living in a just and equitable society are unachievable, Bernie Sanders fights to make that dream a reality every day. That is why I am honored today to introduce to you our next president, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Give it to you raw, no hesitation. With the right ideas to lead this great nation. No handouts, no special interest groups. He don't lie to give votes, he's telling you the truth. And while the media wants to downplay him, he still gon' fight. Tell him all he ain't playing.
All right, Keene, it looks like we're ready for a political revolution. Let me thank the roots of creation. And let me thank Stacey Marie Perosi for that beautiful rendition of the national anthem. And let me thank Reverend Bill Beardsley, Jillian Mitchell-Love, Megan Harris, and Tris Patwan for their wonderful remarks. Thank you, guys. I don't have to tell anybody in this room that we live in an unprecedented moment in American history. And when you live in an unprecedented moment, you need to have an unprecedented response, which is what this campaign is about. When we talk about us, not me, it is not a bumper sticker, although it may become a bumper sticker, who knows? But it is a profound political statement which has the advantage of being very true. Because when we talk about us, not me, we understand that to transform this country, we have to take on enormously powerful special interests. And that no president, not the smartest, best-intentioned, most honest person, can do it alone. That's just the fact. All of you who have studied American history, whether you have studied the labor movement or the civil rights movement or the women's movement or the gay movement or the environmental movement, understands that real change never, ever takes place from on top. It's never one person doing it alone. The only time that real change ever takes place is when millions of people stand up, they look around them, and they say, you know what? This status quo is wrong. It's got to change. And that's where we are now. So I also want to tell you that this campaign is not only going to win the Democratic nomination, this campaign is not only going to defeat Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in our lifetimes. But equally important, this campaign and the government we are going to create is going to transform our country and create an economy and a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. So today, on our very first day on the campaign trail here in New Hampshire, I want to welcome you to a campaign which says loudly and proudly that the underlying principles of our government will not be greed, will not be hatred and lies. The underlying principles of our government will not be racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, and religious bigotry. The principles of our government will be based on justice, economic justice, social justice, racial justice, and environmental justice. So this evening, I want to welcome you to a campaign which tells the powerful special interests who have so much control over our economic and political life that we will no longer tolerate their greed, a greed which has made the very, very rich much richer, but which has resulted in millions of Americans seeing a decline in their standard of living. As you have heard me say before, and let me say it again, enough is enough. Now, this is not talked about too much in Congress, and it's not talked about too much in the media. But we have got to address the reality that in America today, we have more income and wealth inequality in this country today than at any time since the Gilded Age of the 1920s. We have more income and wealth inequality than almost any other major country on earth. So today we say loudly that we will not accept an economic situation in which the three wealthiest families in America have more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. And while we see a proliferation of billionaires, over 20% of our children live in poverty, veterans sleep out on the streets, and senior citizens cannot afford the prescription drugs they need. We will no longer accept an economy in which 46% of all new income goes to the top 1%. And here in New Hampshire, in Vermont, and all over this country, we see people who are not working one job, they're working two jobs, they're working three jobs to cobble together some income and some health care. We will not accept an economy in which over half of our people live paycheck to paycheck. And you all know what that means. It means that if your car breaks down tomorrow and you don't have the money to get it fixed and you can't get to work and you get fired from your job, how are you going to take care of your kids? That is a reality facing millions of people in this country. And what happens if your kid ends up in the hospital and you don't have the money to pay the hospital bills? All of you remember that a couple of months ago, Trump shut down the government. And when he shut down the government, he put 800,000 federal employees in a situation in which they were not getting paid. Now, Trump may have grown up in a multi-millionaire family where he got, at the age of 3, an allowance of $200,000 a year. That was his family. Well, I grew up in a working class family, and my allowance was 25 cents a week. And I know, because that was my family's history, what it is like to live paycheck to paycheck. I know where I came from, and that's a reality I will never forget. We will no longer accept a situation in which, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, our younger generation will, if we don't turn it around, have a lower standard of living than their parents, lower wages than their parents, higher debt than their parents, unaffordable housing, less social mobility. Not to mention that we are now leaving the younger generation with a national debt of $22 trillion. Now, I have 4 kids and 7 grandchildren. 3 of them live here in New Hampshire. Downward mobility is not acceptable to me. It is not acceptable to the American people. This campaign is about moving our people up, not down. But it is not just a grossly unfair economic system that we are going to address in this campaign. It is a corrupt political system which is undermining American democracy. Now, we in New England understand what town meeting is about. We understand what grassroots democracy is about. We believe that democracy means one person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections. So whether Trump or Mitch McConnell like it or not, we are going to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. And we are going to move toward public funding of elections. And you know why we're going to do that? Because I want to live in a democracy where any person, no matter what his or her political views are, any person wants to run for office, they should be able to do so regardless of their income and not have to be dependent on wealthy people in order to get elected. And today I want to offer a very special thanks to the people of New Hampshire. In 2016, this is the state where the political revolution took off. Thank you, New Hampshire. When we first came to New Hampshire in 2015 to campaign, we were 30 or 40 points behind in the polls. Further, the ideas that we were then talking about were considered by the establishment politicians and the establishment media as ideas, as you may recall, that were just too radical. They were too extreme. Nobody in New Hampshire, nobody in America would support those wild and crazy ideas. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage, too radical. Guaranteeing health care to all people as a right, too radical. Creating up to 15 million jobs by investing $1 trillion to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, too radical. Aggressively combating climate change, too radical. Reforming our broken criminal justice and immigration systems, too radical. And listen to this one that was just inconceivable. Not having a super PAC and not begging wealthy people for campaign contributions, much, much too radical. And here's another one. Imagine the idea, oh my God, ending the power of superdelegates at the Democratic National Convention. All of those ideas, inconceivable, never happened. Bernie, what are you smoking? And that's another issue that was considered to be too radical. Well, a funny thing happened in New Hampshire over that year. On primary day, as you recall, we didn't end up 30 to 40 points behind. We ended up winning a very strong victory here, the first victory of our campaign. And that first victory here in New Hampshire led us to win victories in 21 of the states around the country, led us to receive over 13 million votes, well over 1,700 delegates at the Democratic Convention, and most importantly, in my view, it led us to win more votes from young people, black and white and Latino, Asian American, Native American. We won more votes from young people than Trump and Clinton combined. And, by the way, those ideas that we talked about 4 years ago that seemed so very radical at that time, well, today, virtually all of those ideas are supported by a majority of the American people. And as you will hear soon here in New Hampshire, these are ideas that are supported by candidates from school board to President of the United States. So thank you, New Hampshire. You helped begin the political revolution in 2016. And with your help on this campaign, we are going to complete what we started here. We are going to turn our vision and our progressive agenda into reality. Today, as we begin our campaign here in New Hampshire, we say to the private health insurance companies, whether you like it or not, the United States of America is going to join every other major country on earth and guarantee health care to all people as a right, not a privilege. And what the American people are catching on to is that this is not a radical idea. This is an idea that exists all over the world. It is not a radical idea to say that anybody in this country, regardless of income, has the right to go to a doctor when you get sick, without worrying about whether you can afford the deductible or the copayment. It is not a radical idea to say that if, God forbid, you end up in the hospital for 2 weeks, that you don't have to come out of that hospital and see your family go bankrupt. That is not a radical idea. It is not a radical idea to say that the goal of health care must be to provide health care to all of us in a cost-effective way, not to provide tens of billions of dollars in profits to the insurance companies. Not a radical idea. It is not a radical idea to say that when 30 million people have no health insurance, the CEOs of the large insurance companies should not be making outrageous compensation packages. Here is what is going on in healthcare. In 2017, the top 65 healthcare CEOs made $1.7 billion in compensation. At a time when more and more people cannot afford health care, the CEO of United Health Group earned $83 million in compensation. We need a health care system that invests in disease prevention, that invests in doctors and nurses, dentists, rural clinics. We don't need a system designed to make the insurance companies and the CEOs rich. So today we say to the private insurance companies, yes, we will pass a Medicare for all single-payer program. Now, Donald Trump goes around the country and he tells people that if we pass Medicare for all, it will lower quality of care for seniors now on Medicare. Now, I hope I will not shock you if I tell you that, yes, Donald Trump is lying. Now, I know, hard to believe. You are shocked when I say that. So I want to say to the seniors, and that is that Medicare is a very, very strong program, but it does not today cover dental care, does not cover hearing aids, does not cover eyeglasses. Under our legislation, we will cover dental care, eyeglasses, and hearing aids. And today, we say to the pharmaceutical industry that you will no longer rip off the American people and charge us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Last year, this is how crazy it is. Last year, 5 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world made $50 billion in profit. Meanwhile, and this speaks to a dysfunctional healthcare system, 1 out of 5 Americans who receive a prescription from their doctor cannot afford to fill that prescription. How insane is that? People are sick, they go to the doctor writes out a prescription, they cannot afford to fill that prescription. In New Hampshire and in Vermont and all over this country, senior citizens are cutting their pills in half, which is a bad thing to do. Now, I will never forget, way back in 1999, when I was a congressman from Vermont, I took a busload of women, working-class women who were struggling with breast cancer. We went up to Montreal. Now, we went to Montreal not to have a holiday, but we went up there to buy prescription drugs. And I will never forget walking into that drugstore, and we had planned all of this out. They walked into the drugstore, and many of them were buying a widely prescribed breast cancer drug called tamoxifen. And on that day, this is back in 1999, they paid 1/10 of the price in Montreal for the same exact product they were buying in Vermont. And the truth is that all over the country, all over the world right now, the same exact medicine made in the same exact factory in the same bottles are significantly less expensive. So we say to the drug companies that yes, your greed is going to end. We are going to substantially lower drug costs in this country. And today, we say to Walmart, owned by the wealthiest family in America, we say to McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and the entire fast food industry, and we say to other low-wage employers, stop paying your workers starvation wages. All over this country, there are workers now trying to survive on $8, $9, $10 an hour. And you know what? You cannot buy food, you can't pay the rent, you can't have health care, you can't put gas in your car on $9 or $10 an hour. And that is why I am very proud to tell you that since we began talking about this issue, since grassroots groups like the Fight for 15 have been active, 5 states in America have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And I am happy to tell you that just last week, the House Committee on Labor and Education reported out a bill to raise the minimum wage at the federal level from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour. And my legislation, the same legislation in the Senate, has 30 co-sponsors, and when that bill comes over to the Senate, we're going to fight like hell to see that it is passed. The bottom line, is that if you work 40 hours a week in the United States, you should not have to live in poverty. We're going to raise the minimum wage, and by the way, we're going to make it easier for workers to join unions, not harder. And when you look at what goes on in America, whether it's New Hampshire, Vermont, or any place else in the country, you know right away that despite being the wealthiest country on earth, we have an infrastructure which is collapsing. That is our roads and our bridges, our rail system, subways, airports, our water systems, and our wastewater plants. And that is why we are going to put $1 trillion into rebuilding our infrastructure. By the way, the $1 trillion is exactly the amount of money that Trump gave in tax breaks to the 1% and large corporations. So maybe we'll take that $1 trillion back, invest it in the infrastructure. And there's another issue out there that doesn't get anywhere near the attention that it deserves. And as I think all of you know, and every child psychologist in the world knows, is that the most important years of human intellectual and emotional development are 0 through 4. What a civilized democratic society should recognize is that in those years, the most important years of a human being's life, we have got to make sure that our little kids get the intellectual and emotional nourishment that they deserve. But yet today, we have a dysfunctional child care system which is unfair to the children, unfair to the parents, and unfair to child care workers. And that is why together we are going to create a high-quality, universal pre-K system. Today we say to our young people, you know, as you talk about these issues, it's hard for me to imagine that anybody thinks it's a radical idea that we take good care of our children. It's not a radical idea. And the same point is made for our young people. Who would deny that it is absolutely imperative that our young people get the best education that we can possibly provide them? And this is relevant not only to the young people themselves, it's relevant to our entire nation. We live in a competitive global economy. And if you want a strong economy, we're going to have the best educated workforce in the world. Now, 50 or 60 years ago, if you had a high school degree in the United States, the likelihood was that you could go out and get yourself a pretty good job and make it into the middle class. Those days, by and large, are gone. For many respects, a college degree today is the equivalent of what a high school degree was 50 or 60 years ago. So when we talk about public education, it's not good enough to talk about K through 12. We must make public colleges and universities tuition-free. And we have to stop punishing our people for the crime of getting a decent education. You got over 40 million people in this country who are carrying student debt. Some of them, I expect, in this room. A lot of them, I expect, in this room. You want to hear a crazy story? My son just told me this yesterday. In Florida, they are taking away the health care certificates of nurses and other people, taking away their ability to practice because they have not been able to pay off their student debt. I mean, I talked to, a couple of years ago, a young doctor in Burlington. She was $300,000 in debt for the crime of trying to become, which she did, a family physician. At a time when we desperately need dentists. Talked to a young woman in Iowa, $400,000 in debt. Talked to people all over this country, $50,000, $100,000 in debt. Our administration will substantially lower student debt in this country. And in terms of issues that we don't talk about, it's not just what happens to the little kids, it's what happens to our parents and our senior citizens. Today, some 20% of senior citizens in this country are trying to make it on $13,500 or less. Think about it for a second. You are 80 years of age, 85 years of age. You got health care needs. You got to keep the house warm in the winter. You may have to get in your car or do some transportation. You need to eat. How do you make it on $13,500 and live in dignity? And the answer is, you're not. My Republican colleagues in the House and the Senate, they got a brilliant idea. After giving tax breaks to billionaires, they want to cut Social Security. Well, we got some bad news for them. We are not going to cut Social Security. We are going to expand Social Security. And by lifting the cap on taxable income, we're going to extend the life of Social Security for another 50 years. Now, every day, in a dozen different ways, Donald Trump is an embarrassment to this country. But there is one area where he is more than just an embarrassment, but a real danger to the future of our country and, in fact, the world. So we say to Donald Trump and his friends in the fossil fuel industry, climate change is not a hoax. It is an existential crisis facing our country and the entire planet. And whether Trump and his friends in the oil, coal, gas industry like it or not, we are going to lead the world in transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel and into energy efficiency and sustainable energies. And by the way, when we do that, and when we invest in weatherization, making our homes and our buildings energy efficient, and we invest in an energy efficient transportation system, and in solar and wind and geothermal and other sustainable technologies, we are going to create millions of good paying jobs. And if I may, think about a world where instead of each country arming itself with all kinds of sophisticated weapons of destruction, maybe we can have a world which works together against the common enemy of climate change. But this is a profound moral issue, because it seems to me we have a moral responsibility to make certain that the planet we leave our children and our grandchildren is a planet that is healthy and habitable. And today we say to the prison industrial complex that under a Bernie Sanders administration, there will be real criminal justice reform. We are going to end the international embarrassment. This is America. We should not have more people in jail in this country than any other country on earth, including communist China. 4 times our size. We will not continue to spend $80 billion a year locking up fellow Americans. Instead, we are going to use that money to invest in our young people, in jobs and education, not jails and incarceration. And when we talk about criminal justice reform, we're talking about no more private prisons or detention centers. We are talking about ending the so-called war on drugs. Too many lives have been destroyed for possession of marijuana or other nonviolent offenses. And we are going to end the absurdity. I don't know how many of you know this. I just learned about this a couple of years ago. That today, as we speak, there are hundreds of thousands of people behind bars. Hundreds of thousands. You know why they are behind bars? Because they are too poor to afford cash bail to get out of jail. We are going to end the cash bail system. By the way, when we talk about criminal justice reform, we're going to change a system in which tens of thousands of Americans every single year receive criminal records for possessing marijuana. But not, and I want you to think about the absurdity of this, but not one major Wall Street executive went to jail for their illegal behavior which caused the virtual collapse of our economy in 2008. Not one. No, the Wall Street executives, they didn't go to jail. They got $1 trillion bailout. That type of criminal justice system is going to be changed very profoundly. And today we say to the American people that instead of demonizing the undocumented immigrants in this country, we are going to pass comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship. We are going to provide legal status to the 1.8 million young people eligible for the DACA program. And we're going to develop a humane border policy for those who seek asylum. The United States of America must never be a country in which little babies are torn from the arms of their mothers. That will not happen again. And today, we say to the top 1%, people who are doing phenomenally well, and we say to the large, profitable corporations who are, in many cases, enjoying record-breaking profits, that under a Bernie Sanders administration, we are going to end the massive tax breaks and loopholes that they currently enjoy. So here is another absurdity, one of many that we talk about. Amazon, as you know, is one of the largest corporations in America. Last year, it made over $10 billion in profits. Anyone here know how much Amazon paid in federal income tax? Owned by the wealthiest guy in the world. It's not just Amazon, it's Netflix, it's General Motors, it's other large, profitable corporations not paying a nickel in federal taxes. It's the wealthy and corporations stashing billions in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and other tax havens. Well, we have some bad news for them. We will no longer accept a corrupt tax system. The wealthy and the private corporations will start paying their fair share of taxes. Our administration is going to end austerity programs for working families and bring a little bit of austerity to the top 1% and the multinational corporations. And today we say to the military-industrial complex that we will not continue to spend $700 billion every single year on weapons of destruction and the Pentagon. That is more money than the next 10 nations combined spend on the military. Our administration is going to invest in affordable housing. We're going to invest in public education. We are not going to invest in never-ending wars. You are going to hear here in New Hampshire a lot of politicians. Many of them are my friends, and many of them are very good people. They're going to come before you and tell you their ideas as to what they hope to accomplish and the agenda that they're running on. And I want to take a minute to be as specific as I can be about what our agenda is. And let me just go through a few of the items. When we, and I use the word we advisedly, because as I said previously, no president alone can accomplish what has to be done in this country. Because Wall Street and the insurance industry and the drug companies and the military-industrial complex, all of these entities are so powerful that the only way we defeat them is when millions of people stand up and fight back. So together, we are going to enact a federal jobs guarantee. Now, what does that mean? It means that there is so much work that has to be done in America, from childcare, from rebuilding our infrastructure, from transforming our energy system, from building the affordable housing, from all of the great teachers that we need. There is so much work to be done. Let's get to work doing it. Let's put our people to work. When we are in the White House, we will move aggressively to end the epidemic of gun violence in this country. And pass the common sense gun safety legislation that the overwhelming majority of Americans, rural and urban, want to see passed. When we are in the White House, we're not only going to deal with the national scandal of income and wealth disparity, we are going to deal with the racial disparities in terms of income and wealth. It is simply not right that the average white family today owns 10 times more wealth than the average black family. We are going to root out institutional racism wherever it exists. And not only will we end voter suppression, but we are going to make it easier for people to vote, not harder. In my view, in the United States, if you are a citizen of this country, if you are 18 years of age, you are registered to vote. End of discussion. We will not allow folks to try to keep people of color from voting, poor people, or young people. We want to have the largest voter turnout of any major country on earth, not one of the lowest. When we are in the White House, we are going to protect a woman's right to control her own body. That is her decisions, not the federal government's, not the state government's, not the local government. That decision belongs to the woman and her physician. When we talk about us, not me, what we are talking about is an understanding that real change never ever takes place from the top on down. That is the history of America. It's the history of the civil rights movement, the labor movement, women's movement, gay movement, environmental movement. So what this campaign is about is not just defeating Donald Trump. That's important. But it is also understanding that it is imperative that we begin transforming the economic and political life of this country so that we have an economy that works for the children, that works for the seniors, that works for working families, not just wealthy campaign contributors. And so here is my request to you, and I think I'm going to be the only candidate who makes this request, is that I need your help, obviously, to win the Democratic nomination. I need your help if we win that nomination to defeat Trump, all of which is enormously important. But I need your help the day after the election, the day after I am inaugurated. So I want you to understand, and the media doesn't talk about this and never will, but I want you to understand what we are up against when we talk about transforming America. It's easy for me to give you a great speech telling you all the wonderful things we want to accomplish, and that's great, but I want you to know what stands in the way of bringing about that change. Today on Wall Street, you have 6 financial institutions that have assets equivalent to 54% of the GDP of the United States of America. Do you? Thank you very much. Exactly right. Because when you have 6 financial institutions controlling trillions of dollars, that is unbelievable power. And yes, we do have to break up those large financial institutions. And when we talk about Medicare for all, it's great to give a speech about how dysfunctional and awful the healthcare system is. Do you know how much money the insurance companies are going to spend, how many lies they are going to tell us, how many 30-second ads you're going to see on TV here in New Hampshire trying to maintain the status quo in healthcare? So if we are serious about Medicare for all, we've got to have the guts to take on the insurance companies. Let me tell you something about the drug companies who rip us off all the time. I'll give you one story. I was in California a few years ago. People there put a referendum on the ballot. It was kind of a modest referendum which said that the state government would not pay any more for prescription drugs than the Veterans Administration does. VA pays the lowest prices in the country because they negotiate with the drug companies. Fairly modest proposal. Do you know how much money the drug companies spent in one state to defeat one referendum? They spent $131 million in one state. So what do you think they will spend when we demand that there is a significant reduction in prescription drug costs? I talk to people whose kids are on insulin. Anybody here dealing with diabetes? Price of insulin soaring. How much money do you think they will spend to protect their profit margins? And that's what we have got to be prepared to take on. talk about the military-industrial complex. You talk about protecting family farmers. We're going to protect family agriculture and organic agriculture. Well, you're going to have to take on the power of Monsanto and agribusiness. You want real criminal justice reform, you're going to have to take on those corporations who make millions every year by locking people up. They got a quota. The more people they lock up, the more money they make. Are we ready to take on the prison industrial complex? And then there are our dear friends in the fossil fuel industry. 50, 60 years ago, the tobacco industry lied and lied and obfuscated and obfuscated. And they said, well, there is no evidence that smoking cigarettes, and my father smoked 2-3 packs a day, no evidence that smoking causes cancer or heart disease. They had the evidence and they lied. Okay? And as a result of their lying, millions of people, perhaps my father, died as a result. And now you have the fossil fuel industry and their stooges like Donald Trump continuing to lie and say, well, we're not sure. There are two sides to the story. There are no two sides to the story. But the oil companies and the gas companies and the coal companies are enormously powerful. And if, right now, unbelievably, you go to states like Florida, go to states like Nevada, which have incredible potential for solar, you know why they're not moving more aggressively? Because the fossil fuel industry is fighting solar all around the country. All right? So if we are going to transform our energy system, we're going to have to take on the wealth and the power of the Koch brothers and the fossil fuel industry. You ready to get involved in that struggle? So when we talk about us, not me, this is not just rhetoric. This is the only way that I know in how you transform this country. I've given you 5 different examples, whether it's Wall Street, fossil fuel industry, insurance companies, drug companies, prison industrial complex, military industrial complex. All of these institutions have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at their disposal. They use that money for TV ads. They use that money to buy politicians. They use that money in lobbying in Washington. That's their power. Now, the truth is they do have unlimited wealth and they have unlimited power. But we have something that they don't have. And that is we have the people. Now, the 1% may have a lot of money and a lot of power, but at the end of the day, they are 1%. Well, we got the other 99%. Maybe we don't have their power and their money, but we do have a hell of a lot more people. Which takes me to the bottom line. What Trump and his billionaire friends are trying to do, with some success, is to divide the American people. They understand that the American people want health care for all. They want to raise the minimum wage. They want good education for their kids. They understand that. So how do they win? They win by dividing us up. They divide us up by the color of our skin. They divide us up by the country we were born in. They divide us up, men against women. They divide us up by religion. They divide us up by sexual orientation. Our job, for the sake of our kids and our grandchildren, is not to allow them to divide us up, but to come together. And when we come together, and when we fight for an agenda that is widely supported by the American people, there will be nothing that can stop us in creating the kind of a country that you and I know we can become. Thank you all very much.
The only one I know who can conquer this insanity of this Wall Street bickering, belittling the poor. Dollar bills, only things they considering. When people need health care, kids need school. When it comes to politics, Bernie's breaking rules. No attack gets on the competition's needed. He's running on the facts, and it's something that we needed. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. Till the haters on the right, they can feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. All the way to the White House, feel the burn. Feel the burn, make them feel the burn. Till the haters on the left, they can feel the burn. Yeah, you see him scared, shook, he's a